Unfortunately, we've had to edit out some important information because big tech won't let us say that sort of thing. To listen to the full uncut show, go to dailywire.com/subscribe. So, on Saturday morning, the Israeli Defense Forces carried out one of the most ingenious, daring, and heroic operations in the history of modern warfare when they were able to extricate 4 Israeli hostages who had been held for well over 240 days by Hamas. Those hostages were being held by civilians in Gaza, in a place called Nuseirat, which is in the center of the Gaza Strip, not in Rafah, which is supposedly the place the Biden administration will never let the Israelis go. Nuseirat has been a hotbed of Hamas activity for a very long time. The operation is stunning for a variety of reasons. The biggest reason the operation is stunning is not only because of the operation, but because of the reaction to the operation. So I want to go through in detail what exactly happened. Then I want to explain why this is actually important, not just with regard to Israel, but with regard to the future of the West. The reaction to Israel rescuing its own citizens from the clutches of an evil terror group that is enmeshed in a civilian population. I do not mean they just embed with the civilian population. I mean the civilian population in Gaza is deeply sympathetic to and is often working with Hamas. The reaction to that reality is quite dark and has real ramifications for the future of the Western civilization that we all actually should cherish. So here's what happened on Saturday, according to the Wall Street Journal. At 11:25 a.m. local time on Saturday, the Israeli military's chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, was watching the situation from a command center of the Shin Bet security agency and gave the order to go. They had obviously information that 4 Israeli hostages were being held in 2 separate locations in Nuseirat. The Israeli teams overwhelmed the captors who were hunkered down in 2 apartment blocks in Nuseirat. These were located about 200 meters apart, 600 feet apart or so, in 2 separate locations. According to the Wall Street Journal, in May, Israel located the female hostage, Noah Argamani, in a low-rise apartment block in Nuseirat, central Gaza, and 3 male hostages in another building about 200 yards away. The hostages were Almog Meir Yan, Andrei Kozlov, and Shlomi Zev. You'll remember Noah Argamani happens to be one of the more famous hostages who was taken. The footage of her being kidnapped on October 7th. She was at the Nova Music Festival, was incredibly famous because, of course, she's a young woman who's attractive, and that meant that it went viral on social media. And then, of course, video footage shared by the military showed a CH-53C Stallion helicopter loading soldiers and hostages before whisking them off the beach. Here's what some of that footage looked like. You can see here, this is the interior of the helicopter, and Noah Argamani being loaded onto the helicopter. There's also some pretty dramatic footage of these soldiers rushing Noah Argamani, among the other hostages, to the helicopter as well. Now, it is worth noting here who was actually holding the hostages. So as it turns out, Noah Argamani was being held by a photojournalist, and his doctor father, the greatest kinds of civilians, journalists and doctors and artists and painters were holding these Jews hostage. So who exactly was this photojournalist and his family? By the way, again, you don't want your family put in the line of fire. Excellent way to do this. Don't hold hostages in your home. I know, just a tip for the wise. For those of you who wish not to have anyone in your family shot, it turns out a horrible strategy for that is to work with a terrorist group to hold hostages in your home. I repeat, do not put your family in the way of opposing military forces by holding hostage. I don't know why I have to say this. I mean, I do know. It's because everyone is a moral idiot around here. When it comes to the international community, as we'll see, everyone is just moral trash. It's unbelievable. So this photojournalist had worked with, wait for it, Al Jazeera, the most vaunted of all journalistic institutions. A journalistic institution, of course, that is run out of Qatar, which is, in fact, an Iranian front state in many ways. Qatar has been the place where Hamas's leadership is holed up. Al Jazeera is a propaganda outlet on behalf of Hamas. It is why the Israeli military barred Al Jazeera from broadcasting inside of Israel because they were trying to station cameras in areas that could catch Israeli troop movements. And then there was widespread international condemnation. Now it turns out that a photojournalist who had worked with Al Jazeera in the past was one of the people holding Israelis hostage. Remember, the line between civilian and terrorist in Gaza is incredibly blurry. Really, really blurry. I mean, I wish it weren't that way. That is the way it is. That is an unfortunate reality. We'll get to more on this in just one moment. First, I'll be traveling for the next couple of weeks. That means that my team and I need to be pretty careful about securing our internet connections wherever we are. You can't trust public Wi-Fi to have any kind of security. And depending on where you are in the world, you might even be dealing with government censorship. That's why when I'm on the road, I always use ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is a VPN provider that reroutes my internet connection to stop third parties like Wi-Fi admins and government agencies from spying on me. Plus, ExpressVPN encrypts 100% of my traffic, which protects all my private data, like my bank logins and credit cards from Wi-Fi hackers. ExpressVPN is the only VPN provider I trust and recommend. It's incredibly easy to use. Just tap one button to connect on any device. If you want to get serious about online security, sign up right now at expressvpn.com/Ben. You'll receive 3 extra months absolutely free. That's expressvpn.com/Ben to get 3 extra months for free. expressvpn.com/Ben. I've been talking to you about ExpressVPN for years. If you haven't protected yourself by now, well, now would be a great time to start because it turns out big tech, government, they're all getting more intrusive. Check out expressvpn.com/Ben right now. Get 3 extra months for free. This same photojournalist wrote an essay for the so-called Palestine Chronicle, which is a 501c3 organization in the United States, which has apparent terrorists working for it. He wrote a piece back in April while the hostages were being held in his home about the suffering in Gaza. Quote, homes are gone. And with that, the memories, hopes, and aspirations of Palestinians and their ability to realize other rights. He was writing about the rights of the Palestinians while literally holding hostages in his home. His entire piece was called Domicide, How and Why Israel Destroyed the Al-Sali Towers in Gaza's Nuseirat refugee camp. So this entire article was just about how terrible the Israelis are while this person was holding hostage. I can't say this enough times. When people ask that the allegations made by the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is Hamas, or by quote unquote civilian journalists on the ground in Gaza, most of whom are working with Hamas, because otherwise you can't work in Gaza. It turns out that even people who are working with the Associated Press was literally for years located in the same building as the Hamas headquarters. They knew that. They were literally on just a different floor of the same exact building. The distinction there, unfortunately, is blurry at best, and in many cases, non-existent at all. The fact that this is even in question is totally insane. Of course, this is all on Hamas. Every death, Jewish and Palestinian, is on Hamas. They started a war. They got their ass kicked. Their entire strategy was to, in fact, get their ass kicked so they could then whine to the international community that the Israelis were being too mean for them. And then the international left would rush to their defense. Because again, the international left has one rule and one rule only. If you are a loser in life, that is because you are victimized by some sort of extraneous circumstance. And the worse you are, the more it must be the Western powers that are somehow victimizing you. IDF spokesperson Lauren, he also said, I don't even know what you're talking. When you suggest that we were supposed to call off this operation because there were civilians in the area, Israel has an obligation to bring home its own hostages. By the way, I wish America felt the same obligation to bring home 5 Americans who are still being held hostage. And here is the Israeli spokesperson suggesting the reality, which is that countries have, an obligation to their citizens to rescue them from terrorists. Why this is even in question? Is this honestly, is this rule unique to the Jews, or is this something the entire West is supposed to hold by now? That if terrorists take Westerners hostage, that Westerners are supposed to throw up their hands so long as the terrorists hide among civilians and, in fact, side with civilians and enmesh with civilians, and the civilians work with them. Here is the Israeli spokesperson saying the obvious.
We need to keep in mind that all of our war efforts is crafted and designed about bringing back the hostages. So for the success of this operation, at this time, I believe that it was a huge feat from a professional perspective, but also on the level of morale here in Israel. And it was a very, very jubilant day yesterday. So the operational side absolutely reflects and spills over into societal issues. And there is a hope that we can continue to bring home the hostages, either through negotiations or in special force operations like we did yesterday.
It was an amazing feat. Obviously, tragedy was attached to that feat on the Israeli side. I'm not going to suggest that it's a tragedy when Hamas fighters die. When Hamas terrorists die, that is a good to the world. And when people who hide hostages in their home are killed, I'm not going to call that a tragedy either, because they are hiding hostages in their home. It is a tragedy when civilians are caught in the crossfire, but that tragedy is all on Hamas. Anybody who can't make these moral distinctions is not worthy of your time. As it turns out, a huge percentage of the world cannot make these moral distinctions. We'll get to in a moment. One other tragedy attached on the Israeli side is that one of the hostages was a man named Almag Meir Yan, who was rescued from Hamas. His father died hours before he had a chance to see his son was free again. He had a heart attack. He never found out that his son was actually free. Apparently, he had basically starved himself to death in the months when his son was being held hostage. He had lost 42 pounds or something. He was in a serious health condition, and he died shortly, but literally the day of. They went to notify him, and they found him dead, which is, of course, a secondary tragedy. Okay, so The reason why the left is really mad about it, and the left is mad about this, as we'll get to in a moment, the media coverage is insane. I mean, truly insane. We made an entire movie in the United States called Saving Private Ryan about a battalion that was unleashed, about a crew that was unleashed to go save one American soldier who was in harm's way because he had brothers who had died in combat. And the entire movie is about how many Nazis do you have to kill to go save an American, and how many people have to sacrifice their lives. And that's a movie about heroism. But the entire media has decided that Israel, using whatever method necessary in order to free its own hostages, is somehow morally questionable. But the real reason the left is angry is not because of any of this. The real reason that the left is angry today is because there are 4 premises that Israel exploded this weekend. I mean, fully exploded them. Premise number 1, Israeli military action cannot free hostages. This has been the favorite thing of the left since the beginning of the war. The idea from the left was somehow that if Hamas seized hostages, Israel had a moral duty to then surrender in the war in order to get back its hostages. That Hamas should be left in control of the Gaza Strip, and the only way the hostages would come home is if Israel exerted no military pressure, which is, of course, ridiculous. If no military pressure is exerted on a terror group, they are not going to free anyone because there's no pressure exerted on them, and they know that they're winning. That gives them every incentive to hold hostage. In fact, that's why they took the hostages in the first place. So this operation in which 4 Israeli hostages were freed is a reminder that Israeli military action can, in fact, free hostages. In fact, this is one of the things Israel is historically unbelievably good at. We'll get to more on this in just a moment. First, the cost of living is up almost 20% from when Joe Biden took office. Families everywhere are feeling that burden. And yet, legacy media keep insisting the economy is totally fine. In fact, a recent Business Insider article makes the case the American people are to blame because it's the people's perception of inflation that's giving the economy a bad rap, you see. This is Gaslighting 101. The person who wrote this article should be fired or go work for Biden directly. Well, I don't have any control over that. I can help you find ways to save money in this economic climate. One way, switch on over to Pure Talk. If you're one of many American families looking to cut down on your monthly bills, you need to start with your cell phone service. I recommend Pure Talk because it's both affordable and reliable. Pure Talk is rapidly becoming the wireless company of choice for conservatives. Plus, it's great for families because the more lines you add, the more you save. Not to mention, Pure Talk is veteran-led. Instead of funding DEI initiatives, they fund basic services for vets who have served this country. 100% of their customer service team is located right here in the U.S. If you're looking for ways to save money for your family, I highly recommend switching to Pure Talk. Visit puretalk.com/Shapiro to explore their offers. When you make that switch, you'll get an additional 50% off your very first month of service. Visit puretalk.com/Shapiro. Upgrade your cell phone service to America's most dependable 5G network. Save an extra 50% off your very first month. That's puretalk.com/Shapiro today. 2, the idea that Hamas is willing to make a deal to release the hostages. This is the Biden administration's favorite lie of the moment, is that Hamas is right on the verge of making a deal to release these hostages. No, they're not, because any deal Hamas takes leaves them in power. And any deal that leaves Hamas in power is no deal for Israel because Hamas will take more hostages. They have in the past and they will again. Not only that, when Hamas runs full neighborhoods, it turns out that they radicalize entire neighborhoods filled with quasi-civilians. Which brings us to premise number 3. The Palestinian civilian population is absolutely 100% separate from the terrorist population. I wish that were true. It is not true. There's another lie that the international left keeps promoting, but only sometimes. Because sometimes they're just like, well, no, they're really not separate, and that's why Israel should surrender. And sometimes they're like, well, they're totally separate, and that's why Israel should surrender. But the sad reality is the vast majority of Palestinians in both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank support Hamas. There is excellent poll data to support this. We are talking well in excess of 70% of Palestinians believe October 7th was justified. That is a sad and sick reality. And refusing to deal with reality doesn't mean the reality goes away. It means you're a moron. And the entire West has blinded ourselves to this for purposes I'll describe in just a second. That also means that when there is a higher civilian casualty than Westerners think is necessary, they are simply wrong. Israel has the single best terrorist to civilian death ratio of any army in modern history in a heavily urban environment. You're talking about, by the latest stats, almost 2 to 1. It's like 1.6 terrorists killed for every civilian killed. And when you talk about civilians killed, you have to recognize not only is Hamas hiding among women and children, many of the people it's hiding among are in fact siding with Hamas, just like the civilians who were literally holding hostages. By the way, this is nothing new. We know from other hostages who have been freed in hostage deals earlier on for temporary ceasefires, we know for a fact that they were being held among Gazan civilians in Gazan civilian households. Which brings us to premise number 4. This premise is that the Israeli military presence in Gaza has to come to an end. This, again, is a premise not only of the Biden administration, but the international left, is that Israel somehow has to turn the Gaza Strip over to somebody else. Okay, any recommendations? Any? Can't be the UN. Turns out that Israel turned over southern Lebanon to the UN in the aftermath of the 2006 war in Lebanon. You know what happened? Hezbollah took over the entire place and militarized the entire border. It turns out the UN is a trash organization filled with trash people. It's the most Isley of international politics, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. So it ain't going to be the UN. You know who doesn't want to control the Gaza Strip? The UAE. You know who doesn't want to control the Gaza Strip? Saudi, Egypt, Jordan. Israel has offered all of them the ability to do that. They don't want it. And let's be realistic about this. If Israel does not have a significant military presence in the Gaza Strip going forward, how, in fact, are they going to be able to find the terrorists and kill them? How, in fact, are they going to be able to keep an eye on the terrorist activity taking place in Gaza? Let's say that Israel had not been in Nuseirat. How would they have known where these hostages were hiding? How would they have carried out this operation? The reason that Gaza is different than, for example, the West Bank is because Israel never gave up military presence in the West Bank. Israel still has the ability to go into places like Nablus and Jenin, uncover incipient terror plots, and kill or capture or arrest terrorists. So those are four premises that the left holds that were all exploded over the weekend. Again, the premises are: Israeli military action cannot free hostages. False. Hamas is willing to make a deal to release the hostages. False. Israeli military presence in Gaza must end. False. The Palestinian civilian population is completely separate from the terrorist population. False. All four of those things are false. And the military operation exposed all four of them, which is why the left is so mad. But all of that wrapped together exposes the biggest lie of all that is promoted by the international left. And that is that there is a moral equivalence in the Middle East between Israel and its opponents. There is not. One side here is Western and one side here is evil. I'm sorry to break this to you. If you have any moral problems, moral equivalencies here, Hamas is not the moral equivalent of Israel and never was. The Palestinian population is wildly more radical than anything that you can find in Israel by leaps and bounds, which is why count them zero Jews live in Gaza. In order for Israel to turn over any sort of rule in Gaza to the Palestinians, they had to remove physically 8,000 Jews from their homes by force, using the Israeli military. Israel has used more Israeli force to actually remove, not just move around, remove people from the Gaza Strip who are Jewish than it has done so to remove people who are Palestinian from the Gaza Strip. They're still in the Gaza Strip right now. They're moving around from area to area so that Israel doesn't accidentally bomb them. And Israel's giving them warnings. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, Grand Canyon University is a private Christian university in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. GCU believes our Creator has endowed us with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. GCU equips you to serve others in ways that promote your flourishing, creating a ripple effect of transformation for generations to come. Whether you're pursuing a bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degree, Grand Canyon University's online, on-campus, and hybrid learning environments are designed to help you achieve your degree. GCU has over 330 academic programs as of September 2023. Find your purpose today at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu. That's gcu.edu. Okay, so why am I so exercised about this? Because the left reacted to this operation as though Israel had done something morally blameworthy in saving its own hostages. There are a couple premises that it has used here. One is that, once again, the lie that Israel has not been meticulous in its use of military force, which is just stupid and insane and obviously factually wrong. Then there's the weird premise that it is up to Israel to somehow leave the hostages in the hands of terrorists if too many people on the other side are going to die. No country worth its salt, no country is going to treat its own citizens the same way that it treats citizens of another country, particularly a hostile enemy country holding hostages. That's nuts. People who are suggesting that Israel somehow should have foregone rescuing its hostages because too many Palestinian civilians might be caught in the crossfire because of Hamas are out of their minds or lying to you. Many of them are the same people who full on make excuses for Hamas breaking into Israel and for no reason at all slaughtering 1,200 Israelis, including a vast majority of those being civilians in civilian areas, grandmothers and babies. Okay, so here is the reaction. So here are some of the headline screen grabs. You don't hate your legacy media enough. Let me just put it that way. Your legacy media trash. And I'm using the word trash a lot today, but it's because there's a lot of trash today. So the New York Times headline, quote, Israel's euphoria over hostage rescue may be fleeting. The operation conducted by Israel's military to free 4 hostages resulted in a high death toll among Palestinians and has not resolved the challenges facing the Israeli government. Okay, and a hammer isn't a screwdriver. Like, I didn't realize that rescuing hostages was supposed to solve every internal division in the state of Israel. Divisions that long predated any of this, which is why you had mass movements in the streets with regard to judicial reform, if you'll recall, it's a while ago, before October 7th. Also, Israel's euphoria is supposed to be fleeting for saving its hostages because too many Palestinians died in the operation. I think not. That's one New York Times headline. Then there's a second New York Times headline. The bombing was unimaginably intense. Gazans recall the Israeli raid that left scores dead and wounded. Wow. Oh, you know, the real victims when you kidnap people and then people come to rescue those people is you. If you're the kidnapper and the people surrounding the kidnappers who know that the people who are kidnapped are there, and let's be real about this, the idea that people in the surrounding area had no clue that these hostages were being held there is a lie. You know how we know that? Because the Israelis knew. If the Israelis knew, who else do you think knew in the area? Quite a few people probably knew in the area. Okay, that is another headline. And then you have this from the Washington Post. The Washington Post has basically just become a love letter to Hamas at this point. Quote, inside Israel's hostage rescue, secret plans and a deadly wall of fire. This account is based on more than a dozen interviews with former and current Israeli military officials, family members of hostages, and Palestinian eyewitnesses. A deadly wall, secret plans and a deadly wall of fire. Oh man, that's terrible. That sounds truly terrible. Just great headlines happening here from the Washington Post. For Israel, a rare day of joy amid bloodshed as 4 hostages are rescued alive. A rare day of joy amid bloodshed. Who is creating the bloodshed? We'll get to more on all of this in just one second. First, let's talk about something crucial in every man's grooming arsenal, a razor that actually works. I'm talking about Jeremy's second-gen razors. They're bigger, better, blacker, and a #1 bestseller on Amazon. So let's break down why they're so popular. First off, the new second-gen razors are radically redesigned from top to bottom. The ergonomic handle ensures superior durability and comfort. The blades, sharper and longer lasting, giving you the smoothest shave every single time. Something we're all happy about. They're not made in China. Jeremy's has options for every dude. Check out the Sprint 3, perfect for a quick, clean shave. And then there's the new and improved Precision 5, your go-to for an exceptionally smooth and close shave. Both feature a lubricating strip infused with argan oil and aloe to moisturize your skin as you shave, along with a precision trimmer for those hard-to-reach areas. While other companies are busy worrying about DEI and woke ideologies, Jeremy's Razors is focused on what really matters, delivering a superior shave. Visit jeremysrazors.com. Choose the razor that's right for you. Shave like a man, not a manifesto. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, if you're dreading allergy season right now, I've got a great product for you. It's called Armra Colostrum. Colostrum is a powerful bioactive food. It's also the first bit of nutrition you receive when you're born. Mammals produce it in the first 48 to 72 hours after giving birth. Colostrum contains all the essential nutrients our bodies need to thrive, many of which can't be found in any other natural source. There are thousands of research-backed benefits to colostrum. When allergy season comes around, Armra Colostrum can help strengthen your respiratory barriers to change how your body interacts with allergens. It's a great way to naturally support your body through allergy season and beyond. My friend Brett Cooper has discovered Armra Colostrum. She's been taking it regularly to keep her health in check. A lot of the folks on this team are following suit. Producer Savvy has been taking that Armra Colostrum as well to boost her immune system as a new mom. If you want to give Armra a try, I've worked out a special offer for my listeners. Right now, you'll receive 15% off your very first order. Go to tryarmra.com/Shapiro or enter Shapiro at checkout. Get 15% off your very first order. tryarmra.com/Shapiro. That's tryarmra.com/Shapiro or enter code Shapiro at checkout. Crystal Ball, who is the host of a show called Breaking Points and also a dullard, says, quote, Omar makes such a key point. If Hamas committed a bloody massacre of Israelis to rescue 4 Palestinians, it would be universally condemned. Rescue 4 Palestinians? When was the last time Israel just started randomly kidnapping 250 Palestinians, including women, children, and the elderly, and shoving them in a prison for no reason, or putting them among their civilians in Tel Aviv? But Palestinian lives are considered so worthless by U.S. officials, they believe this bloodbath is not only acceptable, but worthy of celebration. Now, the only thing worthy of celebration to the international left would be Israel surrendering to Hamas. That's all. It's that simple. Which is why there were giant protests outside the White House over the weekend. Protesters surrounded the White House and they held a giant red line because the idea was that the red line has been violated, not by Hamas being a terrorist group that is holding Americans, but by the Israelis for, actually attempting to free their own citizens and kill the terrorists. So they surrounded the White House, holding a giant red line and shouting at Joe Biden, of course. You can see it's a fairly large crowd. And then meanwhile, they really showed their cards. They decided to shout at Secret Service that those members of Secret Service should kill themselves. These are a group of wonderful people. Again, the relevance of this to the West, the reason I said at the top of the show, this has to do with the West, and this is not just sort of a faraway conflict, is because A West that accepts the premise that evil terrorists are on par with Western democracies is a West that does not deserve to remain. It just doesn't. And it won't remain because it's undermining itself from within. A West that marches with Hamas, which is what the left has become, that screams at Secret Service agents on behalf of Hamas and carries around flags in solidarity with Hamas and wears terrorist keffiyehs and all the rest of it. Is that a West that can long survive? I have serious questions. Here are pro-Palestinian protesters telling Secret Service members to kill themselves. Look at these white kids. These dumb JUCO, actually they're probably Ivy League undergrads majoring in the theater arts who would immediately be thrown off the top of a building in Gaza. Meanwhile, protesters were holding signs that said delightful things like Jihad or Martyrdom. They literally were outside the White House carrying they're carrying a sign that says on it Al-Qassam, which is a terrorist group, and a sign that says Jihad of victory or martyrdom. That's a full-on terror sign outside the White House in full sight. Meanwhile, another sign appeared that said kill another Zionist now. So, I mean, they're not hiding the ball anymore. That's exciting stuff. Kill another soldier now. Hezbollah, kill another Zionist now. So you have full-on Hezbollah stands cheering for this in front of the White House. Protesters also defaced a monument to General Rochambeau, who was an ally of the United States in the Revolutionary War. And they defaced it saying, free Gaza, while wearing the terrorist keffiyehs. Here's what that looked like. These are people who love the West and love America, probably. Probably we should import more of them and or educate our children to love their message. These are the most moral people, we are told. These are the people who are filled with just the moral righteousness of their generation. The DC police, for their part, arrested, despite all the vandalism, despite all this, the DC police arrested, wait for it, no one. Zero. If those were white supremacists, how many people get arrested that day? A lot of people get arrested. The international left, which has become a terror front group in many ways, is now running wild. And they've taken over the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party is so afraid of pissing these people off. They're afraid that if they do, then they are going to somehow lose the upcoming election. This led Kamala Harris, the dullest knife in the drawer, to suggest that she mourned the Palestinians who died in the heroic Israeli hostage rescue. Here was the vice president of the United States at an event, and hecklers showed up. And then she said she wanted to hear from them while kicking them out of the room, because obviously you have to demonstrate that you have solidarity with the people who really hate Israel, so much so that they're very upset when hostages get rescued.
For the past 8 months, President Biden and I have been working every day to bring this conflict. I'm speaking right now, and I value and respect your voice, but I'm speaking right now.
I value and respect your voice. She said, quote, we mourn all of the innocent lives that have been lost in Gaza, including those tragically killed today. Yes, that's the central message. You know how different this war would be if President Trump were first of all, it wouldn't be going on. President Trump already would have said to the Israelis, go and finish what you need to do finish what you do, provide the security apparatus, and then stop. That's what Trump would have, he said that openly. It turns out that when you provide moral cover for terrorists, they take advantage of every element of it. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, my days are pretty darn full between being a dad, the show, all the other stuff going on. I can't keep up with the day if I don't get a good night's sleep. That's why I appreciate my Helix mattress. Helix harnesses years of mattress expertise to offer a truly elevated sleep experience. The Helix Elite collection includes 6 different mattress models, each tailored for specific sleep positions and firmness preferences. If you're nervous about buying a mattress online, you really don't have to be. Helix has a sleep quiz that matches your body type and sleep preferences to the perfect mattress, because why would you buy a mattress made for someone else? I took that Helix quiz. I was matched with a firm but breathable mattress. I love it. My wife loves it. We are big Helix fans at the Shapiro house. Helix has a 10-year warranty. You get to try it out for 100 nights risk-free. They'll even pick it up for you if you don't love it, but you will. Helix's financing options and flexible payment plans make it so a great night's sleep is never far away. Helix is offering up to 20% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for my listeners. Just head on over to helixsleep.com/Ben. It's their best offer yet. It's not going to last long. helixsleep.com/Ben. We've been reliant on that Helix Sleep mattress for years. You'll learn to be reliant as well. It's that good. With Helix, better sleep starts now. helixsleep.com/Ben. Joe Biden put out a statement. The statement praised the IDF rescue, but also called for a ceasefire anyway. He's still calling for Israel to somehow declare some sort of ceasefire against Hamas, despite the fact its military action just freed hostages.
Before I begin my remarks, I want to echo President Macron's comments welcoming the safe rescue of 4 hostages that were returned to their families in Israel. We won't stop working until all the hostages come home and a ceasefire is reached. That is essential to happen.
Okay, and then Jake Sullivan was like, you know what we really need? What we really need is we need Hamas to just, sign a ceasefire. That's really what's going to happen. Again, the delusion of these people is so strong. Here was Jake Sullivan suggesting that Hamas might walk away from the negotiating table after the hostage rescue. Well, then I guess Israel should have left its hostages with the terrorists, obviously.
Are you concerned at all, given what you just said, that the ball is in Hamas's court right now, that the rescue that happened on Saturday will make it so that Hamas might walk away from the negotiating table?
It's a legitimate question.
Why is that a legitimate
question?
question?
It's hard for me to put myself in the mindset of a Hamas terrorist.
Hey, stop this idiot. How's that? I have a question. How's that a legitimate question? Israel rescues hostages and they're like, well, that might piss off the terrorists. Who took the hostages? Man, a West that cannot simply revel in the fact that people who hold Western hostages, including Americans, get their asses kicked. I don't know if that's a West that can survive for very long. Honestly, I doubt it. I seriously doubt it. A West dominated by the kind of self-doubt and moral foolishness that you're seeing here. That, oh my God, maybe Israel should have left the hostages. What's going to happen now with the ceasefire? Oh my gosh, look at all the civilian casualties caused by Hamas. Probably Israel should have left the hostages in there. And this is not the nation of World War II. It certainly is not. And this is not the West of World War II that was fighting the Nazis and fighting the Japanese. It just isn't. It's not at all. Which, by the way, is why I am encouraged. And I think that it has a lot to do with the fact that the EU is now turning hard to the right. It turns out the European population has had enough of this. The European population, the only good news here is that as the international left becomes effectively a front group for Hamas, one of the good pieces of news here is that more and more members of the West are like, we don't want any part of this. We want to close the immigration. We don't want any people who sympathize with terrorists. We don't want them in our societies. We think they wreck our societies. The Europeans, I think, are getting a little tired of an international left that seems to love Hamas and also riots. And so last night, the European Parliament election went very, very poorly for the left. According to the Associated Press, far-right parties, and far-right, according to the Associated Press, just means anyone to the right of Emmanuel Macron. If you're Emmanuel Macron, you're a centrist. Anyone to your right is far-right. There is no actual right. You're just far to the right. Far-right parties rattled the traditional powers in the EU and made major gains in parliamentary elections on Sunday, dealing an especially humiliating defeat to French President Emmanuel Macron. On a night where the 27-member bloc palpably shifted to the right, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni more than doubled her seats in the EU Parliament. So the EU Parliament is, of course, across the continent. It's continent-wide. It has the most votes for any parliament in the world except for India. And the seats are allocated based on the number of votes they receive. And then all of these parties get together in sort of broader coalitions. Even if the Alternative for Germany extreme party was hounded by scandal involving candidates, it rallied enough seats to sweep past the Social Democrats of Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Germany. Meanwhile, sensing a threat from the far right, the Christian Democrats of EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen had already shifted further to the right on migration and climate ahead of the elections. So they remained the largest group in the 720-seat European Parliament, and they remain the people in charge. But the big star of the night was the party of Marine Le Pen. That'd be the National Rally Party, which dominated the French polls. Now, one of the things that is truly hilarious about European politics is that the so-called far right on issues regarding terrorism in Israel, each of these right-wing parties tends to be wildly more pro-Israel than its left-wing counterpart. So the National Rally of Marine Le Pen, whose father was not particularly friendly to the Jews, that National Rally Party is very pro-Israel. Giorgia Meloni, very pro-Israel. Geert Wilders, very pro-Israel. Viktor Orban, very pro-Israel. So the right-wing parties have a lot of solidarity with Israel. And so it turns out when they look on the streets of London and they see 300,000 people who are marching in favor of Hamas, they all say, well, maybe we shouldn't have that in our country. Emmanuel Macron immediately called snap elections because he was afraid that he was going to suffer more losses. Le Pen was delighted to accept the challenge. She said, we're ready to turn the country around, ready to defend the interests of the French, ready to put an end to mass immigration. Her national rally won about 30%. That's twice as much as Macron's pro-European centrist Renew party that is projected to reach less than 15%. In Germany, projections indicated that the AfD overcame a string of scandals involving top candidates to rise to 16.5%, that is up from 11%. Meanwhile, the combined result for all three parties in the current German governing coalition barely topped 30%. So again, the Europeans are not liking what they are seeing from the center, and they're not liking what they are seeing from the left. And I would have to think that a lot of that has to do not only with the fallout from COVID, but the fallout from an entire wing of pro-terror leftists who have emerged all over Europe. In fact, in the hilarious move of the night, the Belgian prime minister of the left, Alexander De Croo, had to announce his resignation after the defeat of his Flemish Liberals and Democrats party in the European elections. He said that he would resign as prime minister today. And again, they suffered a huge decline in the European Parliament, which is seen as sort of a bellwether for how things are going to go domestically as well. Europe is making a hard right turn. It turns out maybe the Europeans aren't wedded to the idea of national suicide quite yet. Maybe they still would like to go down swinging, being European. And maybe the same thing is happening here in the United States as well. Maybe it turns out that in the United States, we are not liking the party of pro-Hamas. It turns out that Joe Biden's unwillingness to stand up to that party is a problem. It's why John Fetterman, who has been standing up to the Hamasniks, has been doing really well in Pennsylvania. Josh Shapiro, the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, has been doing really well. But the Democratic Party, they can't separate off from its most radical anti-American base, the people who spray paint statues of George Washington in the name of Hamas. Turns out that party might have a bit of a backlash attached. And when that party is led by a doddering old man who has serious corruption problems, that's not great either. The media are now turning on Joe Biden in a fairly serious way. We saw the Wall Street Journal run an entire piece about how he was basically senile last week. Well, now Politico has run a piece about the corruption in the Biden family. It's titled, Biden insists he's not involved in his family's business dealings, but his aides are a different story. Okay, well, that's an interesting way of saying that he obviously is involved in his family's corruption. So he's not involved. Just all of his aides, like all of them, are involved. For years, Joe Biden shared a bookkeeper with his son, Hunter. He also shared a personal lawyer with his brother, Jim. When Jim Biden wanted to know more about one of Hunter Biden's associates, he hired the former head of Joe Biden's Secret Service detail to investigate. Since 2019, Biden has repeatedly distanced himself from his family's business dealings, saying he has never so much as discussed them with his relatives or anyone else. But House impeachment inquiry interviews, public records, and emails reviewed by Politico show members of his inner circle were regularly enmeshed in those dealings. Many of the president's closest staffers and advisors have doubled as his relatives' business associates, both during and after their stints working for the man at the center of the Biden family orbit. Of course, he knew everything that was going on with his family. Of course. Eric Schwerin, for example, was Joe Biden's personal bookkeeper during his vice presidency, while Schwerin was also Hunter Biden's business partner and personal bookkeeper. In recent years, a person named Mel Montzak was personal attorney for both Joe and Jim Biden. Fran Person was Joe Biden's body man. Then, after going into work with a Chinese real estate developer, sought to do business with Hunter Biden and offered him the developer's personal largesse. Dale Pupillo oversaw Joe Biden's Secret Service detail while he was VP, then worked as a private investigator for Jim. So basically, there's just complete crossover. And Politico's noting it. Again, it's not really noteworthy that Joe Biden's corrupt. We've known he's corrupt for a long time. What's really fascinating is that now Politico's reporting on it. So in the last week, we have a report from the Wall Street Journal about how he's senile, a report from Politico about how he's corrupt, and now we have a report from the New York Times about how he's a liar. Now, the New York Times can't actually just say he's a liar, so they heavily imply it. Their title is, quote, Biden loves to tell tall tales. We cut them down to size. It's a tall tale, you see. He's not lying. It's a tall tale. He's kind of like your old uncle out there on the porch smoking his corncob pipe and telling you about the time cannibals ate his uncle. Except for the fact none of it's true. They could just say he's a pathological liar, because he is, but the New York Times won't just say that. Here's how the New York Times puts it. Yeah, it's charming when Joe Biden lies. According to the New York Times, and President Biden's telling, he was a teenage civil rights activist, a former trucker, the first in his family to go to college, and the nephew of a cannibalism victim. All of these claims stretch the truth or are downright false. But Mr. Biden persists in telling personal tales with rhetorical flourishes and factual liberty when he works a room or regales an audience. They are a way to connect with voters, emphasize his middle-class Joe persona, and charm his audience. Despite Mr. Biden's penchant for exaggerating details when recounting episodes from his life, these autobiographical embellishments differ in scale and significance from the stream of lies about a stolen election peddled by his opponent, former President Donald Trump. So they're yarns, you see. When he's lying about all this stuff, when he just fibs, by the way, it is not true that the stuff that he says about elections is magnificently different from Donald Trump. Donald Trump, I think, says things that are untrue about the 2020 election, that the election fraud was responsible for his loss, for example. Joe Biden says whenever his party loses, votes have been suppressed. I'm having a hard time seeing a massive difference there. He continues to go out to black audience and say voter suppression is a thing in Georgia. That's not true. Doesn't matter. The media is going to try and play it as though he's not really a liar. He's a teller of tall tales, you see. Well, here's the thing. He's a liar, and everybody's starting to notice it. And they're starting to notice it because there's a real good shot he loses to Donald Trump come November. Alrighty, coming up, we are going to get into some racial politics with the experts. Those experts, of course, are people like Joy Reid and Jamel Hill. We'll get to that in a moment. First, you have to head on over to Daily Wire Plus to subscribe and become a member. Head on over there right now and get started.